our focus is on our constant of proportionality. And if you remember, I don't know how much room I have here, we have an equation to find our constant of proportionality. K equals whatever our y values are divided by x. So what do these all mean? Well, the y, shockingly here, oh, hold on, I messed up again, represents, the y represents the y value. So in a table or a graph or something, that y is going to represent the y value. Just like the x is going to represent, the x value. This k right here, remember this is our constant. I don't know why it's a k, but our constant of proportionality. Okay, because constant proportionality means that there's a number we're multiplying by every single time to go from our x values to our y values. How do we find a number we're multiplying by? By dividing. So as always, let's look at some examples. It says apply your understanding of the constant of proportionality to the questions below. While training for a marathon, Keith's watch reported how many calories he burned at each mile marker. So mile marker 1, 117 calories, mile marker 2, 234 calories. Is the number of calories proportional to number of miles? Explain your thinking. Well, remember, if it's proportional, it has to have a constant. It has to have a number that we are multiplying by each time. And not just any old number, but the same number. How do we figure out what we're multiplying by? Well, we do that by dividing. So I'm going to take, now in a table or a chart, almost 98% of the time, I won't say 100, whatever's listed on top or to the left is the y values. Whatever listed on the bottom or to the right is the y values. Okay, so the top here is me miles, that's our x values. The bottom here is me calories burned, that's our y. So remember, we do our k equals y divided by x to find our constant. So I'm going to go 117 divided by 1. Well, that equals 117. Then I'm going to take 234 and divide it by 2. And again, if you wanted to use a calculator, you'll see that it also works out to 117. And as you do these, and do you have to do them all? Well, you kind of do, because if even one is different, then it's no longer considered proportional because there isn't a constant. There isn't one number that we're multiplying by. And you can see these are all going to be working out, or all going to work out to 117. So explain what that means. Okay? Well, is the number of calories proportional? Yeah. So I'm going to say yes, because there is a constant of 117 calories. So I'm going to try to spell calories correctly. I'm going to try, I guess. Per mile. Now, sometimes we tend to overthink things. Okay, it's proportional. Why? Because we're multiplying by 117 every single time. So next day he ran 7.5 miles. How many calories did he burn? Well, remember, we were taking the number of miles and we're multiplying it by 117. So if we take 7.5 miles, we're going to multiply that by 117 because that's what we're doing to the number of miles. And if you type that into a calculator, it equals 870, get that right, 877.5 calories. Because we're just multiplying by our constant. Well, what is that constant that we found? Well, guys, this is basically the unit rate. Remember doing that the other day? This is finding the unit rate. So when you find the unit rate, you're finding the constant of proportionality. We sometimes know how to do the things, but we change the names up, and that messes us up. So our constant, our K, is 117. Now, this write an equation. Don't overthink this part. Don't overthink writing an equation. Why? Because what we're going to do is we're always going to take whatever our K is, and we're going to multiply it by the X values. 1 times 117, 2 times 117. And that equals our Y values. So this equation is just going to be our X values times our constant. So down here, we're explaining the relationship between the number of miles and the number of calories. Sometimes I like to use M and C instead, but I'm going to say, you know what? If we take the number of miles and we multiply it by 117, that gives us our number of calories. So I just used M and C. So if we take a number of miles, 2 times 117, we get the number of calories. Take the number of miles, 3 times by 117, we get the number of calories. We tend to write it a little differently, though. We tend to put the C out front, and then we always want to put the number, it's called the coefficient, then the variable. These mean the same thing, because remember, this means multiplication. And you could also do it, replace the C and the M with Y and X. That's kind of the generic version, but it really is nice to replace it with variables that make sense. All right, last thing. Use the information below to determine the constant of proportionality. Well, how do we find the constant of proportionality? We divide. 6 divided by 1.5. 4. 16 divided by 4 is 4. 22 divided by 5.5, squeezing this in here. Guess what? It's 4. And 30 divided by 7.5 is 4. So I multiply 1.5 times 4 to get to 6. I multiply 4 by 4 to get 16. How do we figure out what this number is here that we're multiplying by? Well, we divide. So our K, our constant, is whatever number that is that we're multiplying by. We figured out by dividing. They don't have to be perfectly round numbers like 4. Look here. If I were to reduce 6/4, divide them both by 2, that works out to be 3 over 2. You could also go 3 divided by 2 and get 1.5. This would still be 1.5, so that works too. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to tell you that the rest of them are 1.5. Same thing over here. If I took 36 and divided by 3, it'd be 12. If I took 96 and divided by 8, it's 12. And don't just do the top and bottom. That doesn't work either. But 72, 2 divided by 6 is 12, and 60 divided by 5 is 12. So our constant of proportionality, the number we're multiplying by, is 12 in that example. All right, we're going to pause, and I'm not going to have you summarize today's lesson because you're going to go back to the presentation and do a little exit ticket for me. But me just summing this up, I want you to not get discouraged by the big words, constant and proportionality. Remember, it's the unit rate. It's the number we're going to multiply by. But to find it, we have to divide.